everyone. I hope you're enjoying your dinner. My name is Fiona Williamson, and I am a current junior at Christian College and a former intern at the Luce Center. It is my great privilege to be introducing to you all tonight KT McFarland. KT is one of the country's best-known foreign policy experts and a key architect of conservative national security strategy. As President Trump's Deputy National Security Advisor in his first term, she played a pivotal role in shaping the America First and Peace Through Strength doctrines. KT has been a media commentator for decades, appearing on Fox News, Fox Business News, Newsmax, and other national and international news programs. She appears frequently on podcasts, documentaries, and radio. A best-selling author, her book, Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People offers profound insights into the Trump presidency, U.S.-China and Russia relations, and American exceptionalism. KT's career spans 5 decades, beginning as a White House aide to Dr. Henry Kissinger in the Nixon and Ford administration, and she's accumulated at the National Security Council with President Trump. She served in the Pentagon as a senior speechwriter, press spokesperson, and Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Reagan administration. Her notable achievements, including drafting the Weinberger Doctrine and contributing to President Reagan's iconic Star Wars speech. For her service, she received the Defense Department's highest civilian honor, the Distinguished Service Award. In 2015, she was named Woman of the Year by the Luce Center. She is beloved by students and is a frequently requested campus speaker. KT holds a BA in Chinese Studies from George Washington University, an MA in Politics, Philosophy, and Economics from Oxford, and completed PhD coursework at MIT, focusing on nuclear weapons, China, and the Soviet Union. She and her husband have been married for 40 years, with 5 children and 11 grandchildren. Now, if you all could please join me in welcoming KT McFarland.
Well, after that long introduction, you wonder why I'm not 100 years old and I'm only 75. I thought it would be, first of all, I just want to thank everyone here from Claire Booth Luce, what you've done, and especially Linda, Kimberly. You're changing the country, and it's so wonderful to see. When I was a young woman in college, I didn't have any role. I mean, I didn't know any women who had careers and families and marriages and all that stuff. The only woman I knew, there were no role models in my era. I mean, women didn't have equal opportunities for jobs or college or scholarships. I mean, when I went to Oxford, I couldn't be a Rhodes Scholar because it wasn't open to women yet. It came several years later, but the only role model I had was the woman who lived in the apartment building next to mine in Washington. Her name was Sandra Day O'Connor, and she was the first woman Justice of the Supreme Court. So I, desperate for a role model, went up to her at the grocery store. We would see each other all the time, like nodding acquaintances. And I went up to her and I said, look, if you don't mind, Justice O'Connor, can I just ask for a little bit of advice? And she said, sure. And I said, well, I mean, I've met this great guy, and I think I want to get married, but I don't know if I want to move to New York and give up my brilliant career. I mean, I'm the highest ranking woman in the Pentagon. I'm a big deal. And she said, well, maybe. And then she said, look at it this way. She said, I have 5 sons. I had a great career. I took a little time off to raise my boys, and it worked out just fine for me. So I think it'll work out just fine for you. And it did, and I think that the great difference, though, is now, especially with Claire Booth Luce, you have a lot of role model women, and that's why it's so important for us to talk to you to say, yeah, you can do it, and you can do it just as well, if not better, than any of us have done it. So I really do applaud what you're doing and the speakers that you're bringing, because it's across a whole range. It's great to have role models without having to accost a Supreme Court justice at the grocery store. Let me tell you what I did for President Trump. So in any administration, there are sort of three foreign policy people that really matter a lot. There's a Secretary of State, you know who that is, that's Marco Rubio in this case, and he zooms all around the world, negotiates with foreign leaders. He's the president's face to the world. Then there's the National Security Advisor, and that's the person whose office is about 40 steps away from the Oval Office. And that person is the one who's at the president's elbow every minute of every day. So he briefs the president every morning on national security issues. If the president is meeting with a foreign leader, that's the person who's right there with the president, hands him the briefing book. Every time there's a crisis, it's the National Security Advisor who runs down the hall and talks to the president. And then there's the third person, and that's the Deputy National Security Advisor. That was me. And that person is supposed to take the step back from the day-to-day and to take whatever that new president's ideas are, which are often bumper stickers, campaign promises, and then flesh them out. Okay, so peace through strength, what is that going to mean? Make America great, America first. Let's fill in the details of what that means. And so that's what I did at the beginning of President Trump's first term, and that has remained his foreign policy now into his second term, and it's now bearing great fruit. So I'd like to sort of tell you what was in his head when he talked about America first. In the United States, the leaders at the post-war period, you know, right at the end of World War II, so in 1949, 50, they all got together and they said, okay, we are the only country that really is still standing after World War II. So we've already seen that America had to bail Europe out in World War I, and then there we were again, we had to bail everybody out in World War II, even though we were attacked at Pearl Harbor. But now we're looking at the world and we're thinking, okay, the world is now devastated. Europe was in ashes. Culturally, they weren't sure which direction they were all going. And we looked at the communist Soviet Union, which had just helped China become communist. And so we thought, okay, there's World War III. And we want to make sure we prevent World War III. So how are we going to do that? And they came up with a really unique plan. And that was that we would go, unlike every other country in the history of the world, we would go to those countries that were devastated and we would say, we will help you build. We will pay for our defense. We'll bear the burden. So you don't have to spend money on weapons and defense. You can spend your money on rebuilding your societies and your factories and your economies. And then we said to them, by the way, we really want you to build your economies. We want you to make things again. And we will do it. We will bear that burden. So we will have a tariff situation, for example, where Germany, you make a car and you can sell that car in America with only a 5% tax, a tariff, which is a tax. And then on the other hand, we, America, who builds great cars, Ford Motor Company, will sell those cars in Germany, but there'll be a 25% tariff. So in other words, everybody's going to buy your stuff, not our stuff. And we did it very deliberately. We knew that we were doing it was going to cost us a lot of money. We knew that we were creating potential competitors, but we thought that was a whole lot better than going to World War III. So that was the attitude that we had in the 1970s, 50s, and it worked brilliantly. Europe did not become communist. Europe did rebuild. Japan did not become whatever it was going to become. It rebuilt. Korea rebuilt. We had the same attitudes toward China. It wasn't such a good plan because China didn't really want to be part of our system, and more about that later. But that was the plan that we had in the post-war period. But it was never meant to be permanent subsidies. It was always meant to help our allies and our former adversaries get on their feet. It was never meant to be permanent. And the way I've tried to describe it to my children, now my grandchildren, is that, look, mom and dad will pay for college. We'll even help you get that apartment after you've graduated. We might even underwrite the car payments. But you're on your own after a couple of years. We've gotten you on your feet, we've given you your start, and then you're going to be self-sufficient and get off of mom and dad's payroll. That's our plan, right? That was not Europe's plan, that was not anybody else's plan. So as every American president came after in the 1960s and 70s and 80s and 90s, we went to the Europeans and said, look, pay for, come on, let's pay for the common defense. And they would always say, well, it's not quite a right time for us yet. Let's just keep going the way it is. Or we would say to them, we want to level the playing field for trade. And they would always say, well, you know, not such a good time. And so we always let them get away with it, frankly. And so when President Trump comes in and says, enough, we are going to put America's interest first. We are not going to have forever wars, and we are going to expect you to pay your fair share of our common defense. And one of my jobs was to go around to the European counterparts and say, President Trump expects you to pay, as you have promised, 2% of your GNP towards defense. Thought that was pretty reasonable. So my German counterpart said, that's so unrealistic. You're so naive. And they had no intention of doing that. And so President Trump threw up his hands, and there were some very famous pictures of, you know, him going like this, and the German chancellor going like that, and everybody going like that. So the first term, you know, then things happened. So President Trump wasn't able to really carry out a lot of the things that he wanted to do with America First. Fast forward to the second term, and a number of things had changed in the second term. So we suddenly had massive leverage that we had never before used. We had leverage before, not like we do now, but we'd never used it. And so President Trump said, okay, there are two things that we understand now that have really changed. Number one, the United States is the one consumer market every country needs to sell in. So 10 years ago, Europe was thriving. They bought a lot of stuff. The thought was that China would buy a lot of stuff, 1.4 billion people buying things. That's great. But it turns out now that's not the case. China's economy hasn't recovered from COVID, and Europe's economy, mostly because of their social policies and because of their environmental policies, is flatlined. Nobody's economy is growing. Our economy, even under the incompetent Joe Biden, grew a little bit. But we were still the best game in town. And President Trump understands that, okay, we now have leverage which we are going to use to our advantage. So America First is going to be, we're going to use that, we're going to make you pay to have access to our markets. And so what that launched were the trade wars. So the trade wars are we go to other countries and say, pick your country, but we say to Germany, we'd like to have that tariff, the same amount. Or we say to Canada, we want to sell American butter in Canada. And they all said, well, no, we're not, that's bad. Trump says, no problem, 25% tariff. What's that going to mean? That means you can try to sell your stuff in America, but nobody's going to buy it because it's going to be way too expensive. But he understood that ultimately, and it would be a fight, and it would be, bare knuckle fight. But if he held his ground, every country would have to eventually come up, would have to agree to our terms of trade. We weren't going to rip anybody off, but we just wanted it to be a level playing field. You can sell your stuff in our market, we'll sell all our stuff in yours, we'll have a reciprocal trade levels of tariffs, and we'll all be happily ever after. So that's the first thing he understood, is that there was great power in our consumer marketplace that we had never before exploited. But the second thing he understood was the developments that had happened in energy. Anybody here from like Western states where they have a big energy industry? Well, no, if you're from Arizona, no, they're not doing that. But Texas, the Oklahomas, even Pennsylvania, we realized that we, the United States, could get oil and natural gas out of rocks called shale, and that in fact we had the best rocks of anybody in the world. So if we could find out how to get oil and natural gas competitively out of rocks, that we could then become not only energy independent, but we could become energy dominant. So that's what our entrepreneurs, innovators, all the guys in the mining industry and the energy industry, they set out to do that, and three things happened about 10 years ago. They developed what's called horizontal drilling. So that means, you stick the drill down, and instead of the gusher coming out because you've hit it right on the nose, you could stick the drill, and then it could go sideways and could get access to all the oil and natural gas through in a much larger area. The second thing was 3D mapping. So computers allowed us to then look at the geology of areas and say, oh wow, that would be a really terrific place to get oil and natural gas, but this would not. And then the third thing was called hydraulic fracturing, which is getting oil and natural gas out of these shale rocks. So with those things, all of a sudden the capability happened for the United States to become energy independent and dominant. Now, why does that matter? So the price of oil when Donald Trump came in the first time, leaving the Obama administration for a bunch of dopey reasons, had it at $140 a barrel. Trump comes in, changes the energy policy, takes advantages of the things I've just said, and drives the price of oil down to $40 a barrel. Our companies are making a profit at $40 a barrel. Nobody else is. Russia needs it at over 100. Iran needs it at over 100. So all of a sudden, the United States not only had the resources, but the capability of supplying the world's energy for hundreds of years just on our own rocks. And we could do it cheaper, faster, cleaner, better than anybody. So President Trump said, okay, well, this is going to be part of Make America Great Again. We are going to use that energy capability that we have, and it's going to help remanufacture America. Because if we can make stuff in America, and our energy is so much cheaper than everybody else's, that means our products are competitive. Especially because our peer competitors in manufacturing are Japan, Korea, maybe China, Europe, and all those countries need to import energy. Ours is effectively free. Not free, but costs a whole lot less than theirs does. So President Trump understood, okay, we're going to use that ability, and then we're going to rebuild American manufacturing. And that's what he set out to do in his first term. So Obama, $140 a barrel. Trump, $40 a barrel. Part of it was COVID, but part of it was his energy policy. Biden comes in and says, if Trump wanted it, I'm going to undo it. So what do you think happened to oil? $100 a barrel, because Biden canceled all the Trump stuff. So then all of a sudden, our manufacturing was bad, our economy wasn't good, we weren't making things, but it had the knock-on effect that the bad guys got rich. So Russia, oil's $100 a barrel. What does Russia do every time it gets oil revenues? It goes and invades somebody. So, in the Obama administration, oil $140 a barrel. What does Russia do? It takes Crimea from Obama. Nothing happens. Trump comes in, oil's down to $50, $40 a barrel. Russia doesn't invade anybody. Russia's really trying hard to feed its own people at $40 a barrel. Biden comes in, price of oil goes to $100 a barrel. What does Russia do? Invade Ukraine. So the knock-on effect of our energy policies meant that good for us and good for our economy, and really bad for the bad guys. So what was happening with Russia was also happening with Iran. They had a lot of money to launch terrorist operations in the Obama administration. And Trump, no money left over. Biden comes in, more money. What do? They pay for their proxies in battling against Israel. So Trump understood these two things could, in fact, completely dominate American foreign policy, global policy, and it would change the world. And that's why when he talks, he'll say, drill, baby, drill. And that means we're going to be energy dominant. We are going to replace the energy that's coming from Russia, that's coming from Iran. One of the main parts of the US-European Union trade deal was not just about trade, but the Europeans have agreed that they're going to buy American liquefied natural gas, not Russian. So it's giving us a position, so it's just now starting to take effect. The skyrocketing capabilities are going to be evident in 6 months, 12 months, 2 years. So we're about to take off. So all of the Trump, America First, Make America Great Again is about to come to fruition. But the next part of Trump's understanding was no more foreign wars, no more getting into these wars where we're hope we can't win them. We use America blood and treasure. The allies that we supposedly have don't really like us. And so we are not going to be in that business. We are going to tell our allies that we expect you to do a lot more for your common defense. That's why he told the Europeans, pay up. They have. Now they're happy. The same guys who were shaking their hands at Donald Trump 8 years ago are now fighting over each other to get selfies with Donald Trump and saying, oh, well, 5% of our GNP to defense, no problem, no problem. So it's starting to bear fruit. One of the places that it's bearing the most fruit, though, I would say is what's happening in the Middle East today. I mean, today. And the way that came about is at the very beginning, first week of President Trump's first term, we were sitting, all the senior advisors were sitting around the White House Situation Room, which is actually just like it looks on TV, except it's actually smaller. It looks like if you put 2 of these tables together, that's the White House Situation Room, and maybe 15 people around the table like this. Trump has a big seat. And so, so we were doing, as every new administration does, you reassess the previous administration's policy, and you do a rethink. And so we're going around the table, and we were talking about, Russia, Ukraine, everything, and then we got to Saudi Arabia. And so I said, everybody pull out your briefing books, and said, so Saudi Arabia at the time, as well as other Gulf Arab countries, these are the rich oil countries, were all undergoing generational changes of leadership. That the leaders of these countries were all guys in their 80s. And there was sort of nobody in any of these countries which had people in their 50s and 60s, but they had a lot of good people who were in their 30s. So we go around the table, and I said, well, we've always done business with the old guys. They're pretty good with us about energy policy. They support Islamic extremists sometimes, and they're kind of terrorist tolerant or terrorist adjacent, which we don't like. But we know who they are. We deal with them. And so Jared Kushner, President Trump's son-in-law, he said, no, I think we should look for those 30-year-old guys. And I said, well, they're way too young. And he said, well, they're young, they're untested, but they are of the same age and generation as their populations. So the Middle East, especially the Gulf Arab countries, have had a huge baby boom population. So 75% of the population of Saudi Arabia, for example, is under 35. So Jared Kushner makes the case we should try these young guys, we should give them a chance because they are not terrorist tolerant. They are pledged to stop the support of Islamic extremism. And plus, they've all been Western educated, they're comfortable in open societies, they're comfortable with women's rights, and they're smart enough to understand that if the price of oil is always going to be low, thanks to Donald Trump's policies, they are not going to be able to rely on high oil prices to pay for this baby boom population. They have to diversify their economies. So President Trump took a bet that first week of his first term, and he said, we're going to try the untested guys. And because Trump did that, Mohammed bin Salman was the young guy in Saudi Arabia. There were a number of other United Arab Emirates, but they were all going through the same, 80-year-old, 30-year-old thing. And because of the nod that President Trump gave to these younger ones, they were then able to consolidate power in their own countries. So President Trump, first term, one of the first trips he takes is to those parts of the world. It is to the Middle East and to the Arab countries. And the younger guys were not yet in charge. They wanted to be, but they were not yet. But President Trump came and, because he kind of blessed them in his own way and said, we're willing to trust these young guys, they were then able to consolidate power in their own countries. So that relationship that we had with countries that we had, again, we'd never had warm relations, and certainly not very trusting relations with them, all of a sudden became very trusting. And Trump had close relations with these younger leaders, so did Jared Kushner, and they kept talking to each other all the time. Biden comes in, and again, if Trump liked it, he hated it. And so he just sort of stopped all those relationships. But the relationships continued when Trump was out of office. And when Trump came back into office, his first foreign trip was not to Canada or to Britain, which is normally where you go. He went to the Middle East. He didn't go to Israel. He went to those Gulf Arab countries. And the welcome he got from the guys who used to be 30, who are now 40, they looked at him like the Godfather. And he looked at them as his young proteges who were now running these countries, and they did deliver on what they said they would deliver on. So, to the point where the conference that President Trump went to in Saudi Arabia, remember, women couldn't drive in Saudi Arabia. All of a sudden, if that's me, just ignore it. If it's somebody else, ignore it too. And the conference was run by a woman. It never would have happened 8 years ago. So President Trump makes all these good connections now, and then with an idea of maybe we can have peace in the Middle East. Now, for decades, the assumption in the Middle East was that unless, and everybody agreed, this is conventional wisdom, that unless you had a peace between Israel and the Palestinians, unless you solved the Palestinian problem, you would never get to bigger peace in the Middle East. That was always going to be step one. Trump comes in, and the one way you really get his goat is when you say, well, we always did it this way. And he says, oh, well, if we did it this way, it didn't work, let's do it the other way. And so he said, we are not going to start with the Palestinians. We're going to start with my friends, those Gulf Arab leaders that are now in power. And that's when he then had the Abraham Accords in his first term. Nobody thought that would ever happen. These are peace agreements because the Saudis didn't sign it, but they were behind everybody else signing it. That these countries, Israel and the Gulf Arab countries, made peace because they wanted the economic prospects that peace offered. They knew they needed to diversify their economies. They wanted to be tech powers. I mean, in the Middle East, 10 years ago, women weren't driving and a lot of people were still riding camels. But the younger generation said, we want to be tech powers, we want to be taken seriously on the world stage. And Trump said, great, that's where we're going. So the Abraham Accords happened at the end of Trump's first term, and they were wildly successful. And the trade between Israel and these Arab countries was happening. They were seeing the benefits of it. The Arab countries which wanted to become tech powers, remember, these are very non-tech countries, were all of a sudden using Israeli technology. They were doing a lot of everybody was winning on this. And it got within, so that's the end of Trump's first term. Biden comes in and as I said, reversed everything. But Saudi Arabia still wanted to join. So Bret Baier, my colleague at Fox News, had an interview with Mohammed bin Salman, the 30-year-old who's now running things because he's 40, and said, do you think you would ever join the Abraham Accords and have peace with Israel? And Mohammed bin Salman said, well, actually, we're in negotiations right now. We think we're just weeks away. And then the next night, Bret interviewed Benjamin Netanyahu, and he said, well, do you think that you're going to have peace with Saudi Arabia? And he said, yeah, we're in negotiations. We're just a couple of weeks away. You know what happened? In Tehran, the mullahs went nuts. And they thought, oh, Israel is going to make peace with all the Arab countries. We are going to be isolated. They called up Hamas and said, let it rip. And that's why 2 years ago, almost to the day, you had the October 7th massacres, because Hamas, supported by Iran, knew that if they did that, that all peace between Arabs and Israelis would come to a massive pause and halt. Maybe sabotage. Didn't get sabotaged, but it did come to a halt. So here's Trump. He's got these new friends. He's started the Abraham Accords. Things are going well, but now he's got the problem with the Palestinians. And so what does he do? He tells Israel, do what you got to do. So then Israel, within the last year, then I think we've all seen the pictures of the exploding pagers in the pockets of Hezbollah terrorists. Israel was able to systematically decapitate all of the terrorist groups in the region. Trump had already taken care of a lot of them before, but the Israelis were able to go after Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis and the Syrian air defense systems. And then the United States came in, 3 months, however many months ago, and then bombed all of the Iranian nuclear sites. So what does that mean in the Middle East? We're not sure yet. So 2 weeks ago, President Trump goes to the UN, and we all saw the pictures, like the escalator stops and the teleprompter doesn't work. That wasn't the big story at the UN. The big story was the meetings Trump was having in the conference rooms across the hall. And he met with all those Gulf Arabs, all the guys who think of him as the Godfather, and he said, I have a 20-point peace plan, and I want you to sign on to it. And they all did. They all signed on to it. Pakistan signed on. Turkey signed on. Egypt signed on. The Saudis, the Emiratis, Kuwait even signed. And why does that make a big difference? Because all of a sudden, Trump had the entire world, the entire Muslim world, said, part of this 20-point peace plan is that war stops, hostages are exchanged, the Israeli hostages would come home. Hamas would have to disarm. Hamas could not be part of any follow-on government. So all these countries had agreed to basically abandon Hamas. And that's what happened 2 weeks ago at the UN. So Trump announces this peace plan, then the next day meets with Netanyahu in the White House. So everybody in the world has signed on, right, especially the Arabs. Then he meets with Netanyahu, and Netanyahu signs on. And so Trump now has, Hamas is now isolated and broke. Arabs aren't supporting him. Nobody else is supporting them. Iran doesn't have any money because Iran is sort of broke too. So all of a sudden Hamas, part one, Hamas is just isolated from the other parts of the Arab world. And when Trump had Netanyahu standing next to him, he said, okay, so here's the peace plan, 20 points. Israel, you've signed on. Everybody else has signed on. If Hamas doesn't sign on, and then Trump turns to Bibi and says, you'll have to finish the job. And what that meant was that he would be given permission to go and kill what was left of Hamas. And remember, the world had signed on. All the Arabs had signed on to this. So Hamas is isolated, but that's only part of the deal that was important. The next part was, how do you isolate Hamas from the Palestinians? I mean, I don't know about any college campuses that you're on right now, but the pro-Palestinian attitude and demonstrations that were happening all over the world, but certainly in American universities, tended to say, well, Hamas is the Palestinians. I mean, we all agree the Palestinians are having a terrible plight. But Hamas is not the Palestinians. Hamas is this gang of thugs, murderous, evil people who are probably hurting their own people more than they're hurting anyone else. So the brilliant part of the plan was that after the fighting stops, after there's a peace agreement, Hamas lays down and says, who's in charge? All those rich Gulf Arabs that Trump had been making friends with for 9 years. They would be part of the post-Hamas government. They would be all of the rebuilding of Gaza. And so suddenly, not only is Hamas isolated, but Hamas and the Palestinians are separated. Because the Palestinian people say, wait a minute, after the fighting stops, we're all going to have jobs. And our security is going to be guaranteed because everybody in the region is going to guarantee. So all of a sudden, what shall we say, 8 days ago, probably even not that many, Hamas is completely isolated. So that's why 3 or 4 days ago, Hamas kind of gave in. And I mean, look, there's a lot of details to still be worked out. But the hostages are coming home on Monday. President Trump is likely to go to the Middle East sometime next week. And he's built the momentum to continue on. And President Trump, I mean, the force of his personality is he just is indefatigable. First of all, he doesn't sleep. But he's just so stubborn that he'll just keep going and keep. I mean, do you ever see those little bubble dolls that are on New York taxis where they you hit them over and they pop back up and you hit them and they pop back up? That's Donald Trump. He just keeps coming back. So the force of his personality has driven this whole process. And I do believe, look, there'll be a lot of, here's and there's, that's and often, but at the end of the day, I think that there will be peace in the Middle East. And that is not to be underestimated. I mean, I worked for Henry Kissinger in 1973 when there was shuttle diplomacy after the October War, and nobody dreamed that you could figure out how to have peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Nobody thought, since 1947, when Israel got statehood, nobody had found a way to deal with this, but Donald Trump has. Why? Because first week of the first term, he said, I'm going to back those young guys. And the young guys are the ones who are leading peace in the region. So, okay, the Nobel Committee, idiots that they are, they didn't give it to Donald Trump. I guess they can. That's their thing. But interestingly, the woman they gave it to, the Venezuelan opposition leader, and she's a noble woman. I mean, she really deserves to get acknowledged. What did she say a few hours after she was awarded? She said, actually, I'm going to dedicate my Peace Prize to Donald Trump. No fool, that woman. Because if she ever does come to power, guess who she's going to want to have on her speed dial? Hi, President Trump. Remember that Nobel Prize? You want I'll send it to you. You can just leave it in its gold. It'll look great in the new Oval Office. So I think that as I look at the bigger picture of President Trump's foreign policy, I say, you know something? This guy's figured it out. And because of the new trade agreements we're going to have with everybody, we have them now, we'll have more of them. We'll ultimately have one with China. Because of peace in the region of the Middle East and other parts of the world, because American manufacturing is going to get rebuilt, and because he said, I'm the tech guy. I want to be the crypto capital of the world. He's looking to the future and the technologies of the future. What are those technologies going to be driven by? Artificial intelligence and quantum computing. Guess what? They need a lot of extra energy. Guess what? We have it. And so I look at the future and say, we're really on the cusp of a great renaissance in the United States, and probably a golden era yet again, like it was when I was in the Reagan administration, but this time it'll probably be better. So I'm very optimistic about the future. It's still a little rocky right now, but I'm exceedingly optimistic about the future, and I'm particularly optimistic because of the kind of women who are in this room. You know, the personal courage that you've shown on your campuses, it can't be easy right now, right? When all the bad guys are there telling you you're an evil person, that you shouldn't be normal, you shouldn't believe in America, you shouldn't believe in God. And the fact that you're all standing up strong and coming to a group and an organization like this, not only is America poised, I think, to have a new golden age, it's poised to have a new golden age of leaders, and that'll be people like you. So thank you very much. That's sort of enough for me. So I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Katie. Thank you for your brilliant remarks. I'd just like to say you're the perfect example of what CBL stands for. You're smart and you're feminine, and you can tell. So we have time for some questions now. So please, if you have any questions, line up with my friend by the door. And when it's your turn, come up to me. And please state your name, your school, and keep your question in the form of a question, please. Thank you.
Thank you. By the way, I've met Claire. Has anybody in the room met Claire Booth-Luce? Did you ever meet her? Well, I met her in the Nixon administration. She actually came to the White House a number of times. And I worked for Henry Kissinger then, and I was in that same little office, the National Security Advisor office. And boy, did she epitomize class. She was very tiny, beautifully dressed, spectacular jewelry. And you know, she just looked great. And yet when she talked, this was no sweet little Southern doll. This was a woman who had, in a man's world, had been there, had succeeded beyond all belief, and just had a huge impact on President Richard Nixon. So, well named, Claire Booth-Luce Center, well named. Ma'am.
Hi, Katie. Thank you so much for speaking. I interned at CBL this past summer. My name is Emily, and I go to Hillsdale College. One of my questions was, what is your opinion on the dangers of a war imposed by Trump's tariffs?
A war from where?
Just kind of like there's talk of, on the left, of dangers of a war. They like to argue that.
You mean that they're going to start, those guys on the left? You mean, or a whole nother? They dream on, honey. They can't get organized. Do I think that the prospects of war? I think that the prospects of war are much less now than they were 2 years ago. Now, Middle East, everybody said, oh, it's going to be World War III. No, it's not. You know, will bomb Iran's nuclear sites? World War III. No, actually, it's not going to be World War III. Russia, Ukraine, oh, that's going to definitely be World War III. No, I think we'll find our way to prospects there. The hard one is going to be Taiwan. And what will happen? China's already said that they want to have, the Chinese president wants to have the capability of invading, whatever, Taiwan by the end of 2027. Now, I personally don't think they're going to invade. They're way too smart for that. But they will demonstrate that they have the capability to do that. So what happens then? Is that World War III? I certainly think that with President Trump in office, he will do all the things that you need to do now to make it really difficult for China to invade Taiwan. But I do think that's the only crisis that I'm really worried about for World War III. And as far as the domestic terrorists, like the Antifa guys, yeah, Pam Bondi's got that, and Kristi Noem, they're going to follow the money. Because they're all getting supported by just a few groups of, in many cases, Americans, but wealthy billionaires who, for whatever their evil intent, have decided to whoop us all up against each other. And at the same time, our adversaries, I would say China and Russia, are taking advantage of that. And they're, with social media, are kind of inflaming an already inflamed situation. But do I think that ends in war? Not a chance. Because, you know, look, our cities are going to be clean. We've sealed the border. Again, we're headed for just a great time. And I think those Antifa terrorists, you know, I'd love to see them try to get a job. Other than the one they're being paid to do now. And once we follow the money, we'll shut it down. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Maria, and I'm from Belmont Abbey College in North Carolina. My question was kind of what you were saying about the justice of the peace. What was it like raising a family and working in politics? You said it sounded like you took a little break for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
So what was it like for you?
Oh, I took 15 years off. I thought that when I got married in the middle 1980s, and my husband was from New York, a banker in New York, so I left Washington, moved to New York, had our daughter, had one of our children 10 months later, not 8 months later, 10 months later. I was sweating that one out. But for me, we won the Cold War. I was a Cold Warrior. I was one of Reagan's, the big thinkers in the Reagan administration. So I thought, I'm done. I'm going to be a housewife and mom, and I did. And I raised spectacular children. But I cared more who was going to be elected class mother than I did who was going to be elected to Congress for my district. So for me, I would have happily stayed as housewife, mother, and grandmother, except for September 11th. And I was in Lower Manhattan, saw the towers come down, had friends who died. And as I was saying, I have a daughter who ultimately went to the Naval Academy, is now a state representative in Florida, another Fiona. And she turned to me, then she was like 12, and she was a total teenage jerk. And she said, "Oh, Ma, are you just gonna go to lunch with your girlfriends? And our country's under attack, our city's under attack, what are you gonna do?" And so I thought, okay, I really do have a kind of background that might be useful. So I did get back involved, and then I just went on a suicide mission. I decided I would run for the US Senate against Hillary Clinton. I knew I wouldn't win. I mean, she was going to be president, right? And but I did. I lost, but I held my own, and I'm happy to report now. Has anybody seen pictures of Hillary lately? She's angry. She's bitter. It was always somebody else's fault, and she kind of hasn't recovered. I'm okay. I'm still standing. I'm speaking to an audience of wonderful young women. So for me, that's what got me back involved. And I ran for the Senate, and then I went on Fox News as the first woman they'd ever hired to talk about national security things. They usually had old generals, and they took a big chance, and I wasn't sure I'd like it or it'd be any good, and they certainly didn't know if I was going to be, they thought people were going to turn it off, right? And any TV, news media, they check by, it's like a 2-minute segment of, they can monitor who's watching, who's turning it off, and they thought, well, nobody's going to listen to her. And then they found out that, in fact, women were interested in national security issues. And they were far more interested for a woman to talk about that than some old general. So when they saw the old general come on, they went and did the dishes. When they saw me come on, they would say, "Oh yeah, I can understand what she's saying." So in fact, it turned out to be a great career move for me. And then when I did that for a long time, and then was really curious when President Trump decided he was going to run. And so I got involved there, I briefed him, I became his assistant advisor. So that all worked well, but for me, I've had it all. I mean, I had a great career before I got married. I got married and had 5 kids, and then I came back into government. So I've been able to do it all, but I couldn't do it all at once. And when I look at my daughters and my granddaughter, I've many granddaughters, but only one who's now out into the world. And I think that, wow, you guys have so many opportunities, but it's hard. I don't know any 35-year-old woman who feels she's fulfilled. I mean, she's torn between her kids aren't getting enough attention, oh, she's not doing a good enough job at work. And so when I've met my daughter and her contemporaries, and they say, "Oh, how did you do it?" I said, "Well, I did it one at a time. I couldn't do it all at once." But, you have it all. The problem you're going to all have is how do you balance it all? But I can tell you it's much better than my generation had it, because I broke a lot of glass ceilings, but the women just a few years older than I was, you had to choose. You could have a family, or you could have a career, you couldn't have both. And there were a lot of frustrated women who wanted both and couldn't have it. So whatever you're going to do, figure it out. You can have it all, that's your problem. That's also your great advantage, but you should have it all. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kayla. I'm a Grand Canyon University graduate of 2025. And my question to you
Do you
is...
have a job?
Yes, I'm a legal assistant.
Awesome, okay.
Yes. What would be your advice for us young women going into this type of field, being that we are female and we are conservative and Christians?
Well, the Christian part should be the most, that's your heart, right? That's your heart and that's your soul, so stay true to that. The other parts of it, though, are doing what you're doing, just having the personal courage to just not let them beat you up. I mean, not beat you up like this, but beat you up here. And just stick to your guns. I mean, doesn't everybody have an internal voice? I mean, I do. I don't know if you want to call it your soul or your conscience or, I don't know, your fairy godmother, but you've got it. Everybody's got it, and just listen to that. The other thing I would say, though, is that the people who, the Gen Z, you're all about life-work balance, right? Forget it. It's just work really hard now. And if you, especially now, I mean, you're in the workplace, don't worry about your life work balance. Just work really hard. Because if you can work hard and get yourself on the track ahead of everybody else, then you can worry about your life work balance when you're in your 30s and you want to have a family and you want to try to figure that out. But if your life work balance now is, should I go to the party on Friday, or should I write that paper? Should I do the research project that my boss really needs? Do the research project that your boss really needs. The life-work balance comes eventually. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Lavorse. I go to Grove City College. And my question is, you were talking about how sometimes we are women in a man's world.
Yeah.
And my question would be, what is your advice to dealing with sometimes having to work and thrive in a man's world? What is your advice to that?
Well, I was in the ultimate man's world, right? I was at the Pentagon. And where they didn't even know what professional women were. They thought women were nurses, women were secretaries, women were not their bosses. I think that for me, what really helped is that I had kick-ass credentials. I mean, I'd gone to MIT and taught nuclear weapons, so some lieutenant colonel, he's not going to try to one-up me. I knew a whole lot more than he did. So I had that, and that was good because it was a bit intimidating, but it also gave me an enormous amount of confidence. Because I think what we all, I mean, it's a woman thing, right? We lack confidence. We never think we're quite good enough. Or we always think, well, you know, because everybody understands that. I'm not going to say that in the meeting. I don't want to sound stupid. Just go with that inner voice. I mean, I remember, and I do this myself. I'm 75 years old, and I'm still doing it. And I'll go to a meeting, and I'll think, I'm going to say this. And I think, no, everybody knows that. I'm not going to say that. That's so obvious. And some dope comes, some guy will say the same thing, and they'll all say, oh, how great, what insightful thought. And I'm thinking, I could have said that, why didn't I? And so be the one who says it. So look, women consistently overpromise, but the opposite. Women say, I don't think I can do that, but then they work so hard that they overdo it. And men will always say, oh yeah, I can do that, no problem. No idea what they're going to do. But so men tend to overpromise and underdeliver. And I would say to any young woman today, overpromise and overdeliver, because you're the only ones who can do it. Guys won't. Thanks. By the way, I'm very happily married to a very wonderful, smart man. And I always let him think he won.
Hi, KT. Thank
Hi.
you so much for speaking here today. My name is Brooklyn, and I go to Union University. You talk a lot about the new golden age of America, which I hope to see as well. But also, I know many people here my age are concerned about the rise of AI and the potential dangers with that. What are your thoughts on that?
So this is artificial intelligence, quantum computing, ChatGPT. Are you going to have a job? Right? Is it going to? There are a couple of questions. One is, how is it going to change the American society and American workforce? So if you're studying really hard because you want to be a paralegal, well, ChatGPT is probably going to take your job. But on the other hand, there will be new jobs created as a result of that. I don't know what those new jobs are going to be, but I'm sure that they'll be there. They always have. I mean, every time we've had a new technology, we've had, new ways of making a living, new ways of making things. So I'm confident that that will emerge. I also am confident that with this new technology, it's coming. We're in a terrific position because of the energy that we have. This is all massively energy consuming. This is why everybody's building data centers as fast as they can. And that's coming at you fast and hard. That's going to be here not in 3 years, that's going to be here in 5 months. And so we're well equipped for that. What worries me is is more of the social implications of it. So I'm thinking like tech, but social media tech. So how is that going to scramble your brain? I don't think we know. I mean, my daughter, Representative Fiona McFarland, the one who told me to get back to work, who went to the Naval Academy, she's now a state representative in Florida. And her signature legislation was data privacy and the effect that social media was having on young children. So she led the legislation in the state of Florida. So Florida was the first state to say social media, if you're under the age of 14, you can't be on it. And it's not mom and dad who have to enforce it, it's the social media companies themselves, and there's a right to sue. So what she found in her research and in the interviews she was having was a couple of things. One, that particularly for young women, the addiction to social media was causing self-harm and self-hate and suicide and all sorts of bad stuff that was happening. The other thing was that when she was, she convened all these panels, and she would ask a 12-year-old girl, well, how is it going to impact your life if you can't be on social media? And 12-year-olds would say, I'm going to go commit suicide. I won't have any friends. My life is over. My whole life is there. And then she said, but what if we banned it for everybody? And then, oh, you mean my other friends aren't going to be able to be online? Oh, okay. And like my parents don't have to enforce it? Oh, well, maybe that's something we want to look at. I think in the end, we're going to find out how pernicious the effect of constant social media has had on little children. And that probably is the place we need to address ourselves, to have legislation that protects little children. Look, I'm a big First Amendment person, but I honestly think a 12-year-old girl needs to be protected. And it's incumbent not just upon her parents, but her society. So a lot of big issues. You'll have to solve them. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for one more question.
Hello, my name is Mercedes Skid. I go to the University of Dallas, and I'm a former Claire Booth Luce intern.
Yeah. So you've had social media training. You know how to speak publicly. You're doing a great job so far. So let's hear your question.
Thank you. At a recent debate on Trump's foreign policy that our school hosted, we discussed, or rather one student brought up the point that he thinks that Trump's America First policies are going to drive America into a sort of isolationist mindset, which will decrease our influence in Asia, leading more Asian countries to become more communist, or communist beliefs to become more appealing to them. And I was wondering how you would respond to that.
Yeah, so this is the argument that America First means America withdrawn, that we're just not, worry about your own things. Don't worry, we're not going to get involved. I think that America First, as he's defined it, is a much broader concept. So for example, this week, we have decided to back the peso, the Argentinian peso of President Milei of Argentina, because he has terrific policies. He's slashed the cost of government, he's done very responsible things, but there's a lot of hangover from the generation before him. And so President Trump has taken what on its face does not look like America First, where he's saying, well, America's going to we're going to buy the peso, we're going to help that currency not falter and crash and fall. So America First is not just what's first for us, but what's first for us in the bigger scheme of things. So if you look at Asia, particularly, and what's happened in Asia in the last decade is that the Chinese, particularly the Chinese, have gone around the world and they've said, look, democracy doesn't work in the 21st century. Look, America can't govern itself, Europe can't govern itself. We are the only ones who can guarantee to your populations rapid economic progress and prosperity and order. And so that's what they've been doing. And they've been going around the world, and they've had a quote, not a China first, it's really a China first policy, but they pretend it's not. And so they've gone around to other countries, Pakistan being one example, and they've said to the Pakistan government, oh, we're going to build you a port. It's going to be terrific. It's going to be jobs for all the Pakistanis. And then once the port is built, then there's going to be a lot of trade that comes through here, and you're going to have a huge income stream. It's going to be great. And so the Chinese said, okay, so sign here. And so Pakistan signs here. But of course, it wasn't Pakistani workers who built the port. It was Chinese workers who were imported. And then once the port got built, commercial port, then it turns out, well, it didn't have the revenue stream that it was anticipated. So guess what? Pakistan couldn't pay it back. So what does China say? Like the mob, right? They say, well, we're going to seize the asset. And so now that port is where the Chinese Navy home ports. And so is that China first? Yeah, that's China first. It sounds like it's not. It sounds like it's China generous. But it turns out that it's China taking and exploiting everybody. We, on the other hand, say America first, but I think that the picture of America first is not an isolationist picture as a more expansive idea of what is the best interest of the United States. Just like after World War II, we looked at Europe and we said, what's in America's best interest? To make sure that Europe is not communist and that European countries get back on their own 2 feet. So the way I would debate that person is to say, it's not just America isolationist first. We're not going to do dumb stuff that's going to harm us. But on the other hand, our picture of America first can sometimes include stuff that's maybe America first, not necessarily right now today, but definitely day after tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so
ladies.
much. I think we'll have time for some photos now, possibly.
I'd love
So
to.
thank you so much again.
And I just want to really reemphasize what I said when I started. I'm just so proud of all of you. And I know I'm sure that you've been discriminated against. I'm sure that people have said a lot of bad things about you just because of your politics and your belief in the family and God and the country. That's not a cool thing to do right now on college campuses. And so just stick to it. The country, by the way, is coming around to where you are. I think we've hit peak woke, right? So even Democrats are now thinking, well, maybe we shouldn't have those boys in the bathrooms with the girls. So you're on a roll, but just don't lose heart and just keep doing what you're doing and just smile to yourself knowing that all those people who say, who criticize you, just think, where are you guys going to be in 5 years? You going to be happy? You're going to have a career? You're going to have a real job? You're going to have a relationship? Probably not. And so you really own the future. Just don't let them own you for now. Thank you very much. Thank you.